Hey guys, tonight we embark on a journey across time and sand, tracing the ancient African salt roads that once pulsed with the footsteps of traders, camels, and stories whispered under starry skies. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the Sahara, the sun dipping low, casting an orange glow over endless dunes, the air dry and heavy with the scent of earth and distant fires. You're about to follow the paths where salt white, as desert moonlight, was more precious than gold, a lifeline for communities and empires alike. But here's the reality check. You probably won't survive this trek without a camel, a water flask, and a bit of luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's like a little global campfire where we all gather. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start where it all began, long before GPS, before bustling cities, before the internet. There were the ancient African salt roads. These weren't paved highways, but shifting tracks across the Sahara Desert, etched by countless feet and hooves over centuries. Salt, that crystalline mineral you probably toss on your fries without a second thought, was once a treasure that shaped the destiny of entire civilizations. It's fascinating to realize that salt roads existed as early as 3,000 years ago, linking the arid north with the fertile south. Traders, often Tuareg nomads or Berber merchants, navigated these routes, carrying slabs of salt harvested from desert mines or evaporated pans, exchanging them for gold, ivory, and other goods. Historians still argue whether these routes were formalized trade corridors or more fluid networks adapting with seasons and political shifts. But what's undeniable is their impact. They knit together disparate cultures, economies, and belief systems across vast distances. The salt roads were the Sahara's veins, pulsing with commerce and culture, sustaining life in places where water was scarce and survival was a daily challenge. You can almost hear the crunch of salt blocks underfoot, the low murmur of camel bells, and the rhythmic chants of traders encouraging their beasts onward. This ancient trade wasn't just about salt, it was about connection, resilience, and the human spirit's relentless drive to thrive in the harshest environments. So, as you settle in, let your mind wander across these timeless sands, feeling the grit between your toes and the cool night air brushing your skin. The story of the African salt roads is just beginning, and it's one you won't want to miss. You're now stepping deeper into the story of salt's incredible value and uses, the very reasons these ancient African salt roads thrived for centuries. Salt wasn't just a seasoning to sprinkle on your food, it was a necessity, a lifeline, and sometimes even a currency. Picture yourself in a bustling desert market, the sun blazing overhead, where slabs of salt gleam like pale bricks stacked high, waiting to be traded for gold, ivory, or fine cloth. In West Africa, where natural salt deposits were scarce, salt was literally worth its weight in gold. You can almost hear the clink of coins and the murmur of negotiations as traders barter salt for gold dust mined deep in the southern forests. Salt's importance goes beyond taste. It was essential for preserving food in hot climates, preventing spoilage in meat and grains, which was crucial for survival in places where fresh food wasn't always available. It also played a role in maintaining health by replenishing the body's electrolytes in the heat of the desert. But salt's uses weren't just practical, it had spiritual and symbolic significance too. Some communities believed salt had purifying powers, using it in rituals to ward off evil spirits or to bless new homes. Salt was woven into the very fabric of life, economy, and belief. Historians still argue whether salt's value was primarily economic or if its cultural and spiritual importance was equally influential in sustaining these trade networks. What's clear is that salt shaped societies in profound ways. The trade routes themselves were complex networks, not a single highway stretching thousands of miles across the Sahara. The main arteries included the Garamantian Road, which ran near the Bilma salt mines, and the Tagaza Trail, famous for its rock salt deposits. Caravans, often led by Berber traders, carried salt north to Mediterranean markets in cities like Tripoli, Tunis, and Sijilmasa, while bringing back gold, ivory, and other goods from the south. Salt's journey was intertwined with the rise and fall of powerful empires like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, each controlling parts of the trade and enriching themselves through it. The Mali Empire's Mansa Musa, often called the richest man in history, owed much of his wealth to controlling both gold and salt mines. The trade also facilitated the spread of Islam, as merchants and scholars travelled these routes, bringing new ideas, art, and architecture to West Africa. So, as you imagine the weight of salt slabs on camelbacks and the shimmering gold dust exchanged in desert markets, remember this: salt was more than a mineral. It was a key that unlocked wealth, culture, and connection across one of the world's harshest landscapes. You trudge onward now, feeling the Sahara's endless expanse stretch out before you, a vast ocean of sand and sun that tests every ounce of your endurance. The desert isn't just a backdrop to the salt roads. It's a formidable character in this story, shaping every step, every decision, every survival tactic of the traders who dared to cross it. The Sahara, the largest hot desert in the world, covers about 3.6 million square miles, roughly the size of the United States. Imagine that, a scorching, dry wilderness so vast it swallows the horizon in every direction. The heat during the day is relentless, baking the sand to blistering temperatures, while nights plunge into surprising cold, sometimes near freezing. Sandstorms can appear suddenly, turning day into a blinding, choking nightmare. You probably didn't pack goggles or a scarf, but the traders did turbaned heads wrapped tightly to protect against wind and sunburn. Camels, affectionately called the ships of the desert, are your best friends here. Their padded feet glide over sand, and they can survive days without water, making them indispensable for long journeys. Historians still argue whether the ancient salt routes were primarily determined by water sources or by the locations of salt deposits, but what's clear is that survival depended on knowing where to find life-giving wells and oases. These spots were like precious gems scattered across the desert, offering respite and refreshment. Some oases, like those near the salt mines of Tagaza and Bilma, became vital hubs for trade caravans to rest, resupply, and exchange goods. You might be surprised to learn that some traders used crocodile dung as a kind of sunscreen or insect repellent, a quirky and slightly gross tidbit that shows just how inventive people had to be to survive. The dung was mixed with oils and applied to the skin, believed to protect against the harsh sun and pesky flies. Not exactly the spa treatment you'd expect, but effective enough to be passed down through generations. Navigating the desert was no small feat. Traders relied on stars, landmarks, and oral maps passed down through families. The Tuareg people, known as the Blue Men of the Sahara for their indigo-dyed robes, were expert guides and guardians of these routes. Their knowledge of the desert's moods and secrets was invaluable, and their songs and stories helped keep morale high during long, grueling treks. So, as you imagine yourself wrapped in a dusty turban, squinting against the glare, leading your camel through shifting dunes, remember that the desert was both a harsh adversary and a silent partner in the ancient salt trade. It demanded respect, cunning, and resilience qualities that define the traders who made these routes legendary. You find yourself settling into the rhythm of the caravan trade, the steady pace of camels plodding through the sand like clockwork, their bells jingling softly in the desert breeze. The rise of camel caravans was a game changer for the salt roads, transforming scattered, risky journeys into organized, reliable networks that connected distant cultures and economies. Before camels, crossing the Sahara was a brutal, often impossible task. Horses and donkeys struggled with the heat and lack of water, but camels, with their unique adaptations, became the desert's ultimate transport. These ships of the desert could carry up to 600 pounds of goods, travel 25 miles a day without water, and survive on thorny desert plants that other animals wouldn't touch. Their feet spread wide on the sand, preventing them from sinking, and their humps stored fat, not water as many believe, which helped them endure long stretches without food. The introduction of camels around the 1st century AD revolutionized trade, enabling larger caravans to form and reach farther destinations. Historians still argue whether camel domestication spread from Arabia or North Africa, but what's certain is that their arrival sparked a boom in trans-Saharan commerce. Caravans could now carry vast quantities of salt slabs, gold nuggets, textiles, and other precious commodities across the desert, linking sub-Saharan Africa with Mediterranean and Middle Eastern markets. This intercontinental exchange fostered cultural diffusion, spreading languages, religions, and technologies. The caravan routes became arteries of civilization, with key stops like Sijil Masa and Gat serving as bustling trade hubs. Traders often traveled in groups of hundreds or even thousands, not just for protection against bandits, but to pool resources and share knowledge. Camels were carefully managed, with experienced handlers ensuring their health and pace. The caravan leader, or Amir, was a respected figure who coordinated logistics, negotiated with local tribes, and maintained order. You might chuckle at the idea that some caravans carried salt blocks so large They had to be cut down to size with axes at the destination talk about heavy luggage. But this was serious business. Salt was a lifeline for many communities, and its trade supported entire economies. The caravan trade also fostered social bonds, with traders sharing meals, stories, and songs around campfires under the vast desert sky. So, as you imagine the caravan's slow but steady march, feel the sway of camelbacks beneath you, the cool night air filled with the scent of spices and smoke. The rise of the caravan trade wasn't just about moving goods, it was about weaving together a vast, vibrant tapestry of human connection across one of the world's most challenging landscapes. You arrive now at the legendary city of Timbuktu, a shimmering jewel of the desert that rose to prominence during the golden age of the salt trade. Imagine wandering through its bustling markets, the air thick with the scent of spices, leather, and freshly ground millet, where slabs of salt are stacked alongside piles of gold dust, fine textiles, and intricately woven baskets. Timbuktu wasn't just a trading hub, it was a beacon of knowledge, culture, and wealth that drew scholars, poets, and merchants from across Africa and beyond. At its height between the 14th and 16th centuries, Timbuktu was part of the Mali Empire, one of the richest and most powerful states in Africa. The city's wealth was largely fueled by control over the salt and gold trade routes. Salt from the northern mines was brought here by camel caravans, exchanged for gold mined in the forests to the south. The trade was so lucrative that it helped finance the construction of impressive mud brick mosques like the Jingareba Mosque, which still stands today as a testament to the city's golden era. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's fame as a centre of learning was as widespread as once believed, but there's no doubt it housed thousands of manuscripts on subjects ranging from astronomy to law, preserved in private libraries and madrasas. This intellectual wealth was carried along the same salt roads that brought goods, spreading ideas and culture across the Sahara. You might find it quirky that some traders believed the salt itself had magical properties, capable of protecting against evil spirits or curing illnesses. Salt was more than a commodity. It was woven into the spiritual and daily lives of the people here. The city's vibrant markets were alive with music, storytelling, and the rhythmic clatter of merchants bargaining, creating a sensory tapestry that must have been both exhausting and exhilarating. As you stroll through Timbuktu's sun-drenched streets, you can almost hear the echoes of past traders singing their songs, the call to prayer ringing out over the desert, and the rustle of manuscripts being carefully unrolled. This city was a crossroads of the world, where salt and knowledge flowed hand in hand, shaping the destiny of West Africa and beyond. You continue your journey, feeling the subtle shift as salt trade routes become conduits for more than just goods. They carry ideas, faith, and culture. The spread of Islam across West Africa is deeply intertwined with the salt trade, as merchants and scholars travelled these routes, bringing with them not only salt, but also new religious beliefs and practices. Imagine the desert nights illuminated by campfires, where traders discuss not just prices, but also verses from the Quran, sharing knowledge that would reshape entire societies. Salt was essential in Islamic rituals, used for purification and in various ceremonies, making it a spiritual as well as a practical commodity. The salt roads facilitated the establishment of Islamic centers of learning in cities like Timbuktu and Gao, where mosques and madrasas flourished. These centers attracted scholars from across the Muslim world, turning West Africa into a vibrant intellectual hub. Historians still argue whether Islam spread primarily through trade or conquest in this region, but the peaceful exchange along salt routes undeniably played a significant role. The Tuareg and Berber traders, many of whom were Muslim, acted as cultural ambassadors, blending Islamic practices with local traditions. This fusion created unique expressions of faith that persist today. You might find it amusing that some traders carried small salt amulets believed to protect against bad luck and illness during long journeys. These talismans were a quirky blend of superstition and faith, highlighting how salt's significance extended beyond the material world. As you imagine the caravans winding through the desert, their camels laden with salt and their riders reciting prayers, you realize the salt roads were more than trade routes. They were spiritual highways, shaping the religious landscape of an entire continent. The salt you once thought of as just a kitchen staple was, in these vast deserts, a sacred thread weaving together people, places, and beliefs. You find yourself swept into the lively cadence of song and story, the soundtrack of the salt roads that kept traders connected and spirits high across the endless desert. Imagine the flickering glow of campfires under a vast, star-studded sky, where weary merchants and camel handlers gather to share tales, sing songs, and pass down knowledge through generations. These oral traditions were more than entertainment, they were vital tools for navigation, memory, and community bonding. Traders used songs as mnemonic devices, encoding routes, water sources, and trading practices into melodies and rhythms that could be easily remembered and shared. The call and response style, common among Tuareg and Berber groups, created a communal experience, reinforcing trust and cooperation. You might picture a caravan leader singing a verse about the next oasis, with the group echoing back, their voices blending with the desert wind. Historians still argue whether these songs were purely functional or also served deeper social and spiritual purposes, but it's clear they were integral to the caravan culture. Storytelling preserved history, laws, and cultural values, ensuring that even in the vastness of the Sahara, identity and tradition endured. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some traders believed that singing to their camels improved the animal's endurance and mood, much like a lullaby soothes a restless child. Whether or not the camels appreciated the serenade, it certainly helped the humans feel less alone on those long, dusty journeys. So, as you imagine the soft hum of voices rising and falling with the desert breeze, the crackle of firewood, and the gentle sway of camels settling in for the night, you realize that the salt roads were as much about human connection as they were about commerce. The songs and stories carried the heartbeat of the desert, echoing across time and sand, inviting you to listen closely and join in. You're now stepping into the curious world of quirky salt rituals, those fascinating customs that traders and desert dwellers practiced to harness the mystical power of salt. Imagine a campfire scene where, after a long day's march, traders perform rituals that might seem strange or even a bit gross to the uninitiated, like the use of crocodile dung as sunscreen. Yes, you read that right. In the Sahara's blazing sun, some nomads mixed crocodile dung with oils to create a protective paste. This might sound like a prank or a survival myth, but it was a practical solution passed down through generations, believed to shield skin from the harsh rays and pesky insects. Salt itself was central to many rituals. Some communities believed that sprinkling salt around their tents or homes could ward off evil spirits or bad luck. In certain divination practices, salt was used to interpret signs or predict the future, its crystals reflecting the unknown. The mineral's purity and preservative qualities made it a symbol of protection and endurance, qualities desperately needed in the desert's unforgiving environment. Historians still argue whether these rituals were widespread or localized customs, but their presence highlights the deep cultural significance of salt beyond its economic value. These practices intertwine spirituality, survival, and social cohesion in ways that modern observers might overlook. You might chuckle at the idea that some traders carried salt in tiny leather pouches as talismans, believing it could bring good fortune or even act as a love charm. Salt was a versatile companion, both practical and magical, on these long journeys. So as you picture the flickering flames and the solemn faces of traders performing these rituals, remember that the salt roads were not just about commerce, they were about human creativity, belief, and the quest to find meaning and protection in a harsh world. The salt you sprinkle on your food tonight carries echoes of these ancient customs, a silent witness to centuries of desert life. You're now stepping into the social fabric woven tightly by the salt trade, where salt wasn't just a commodity, but a force shaping communities, hierarchies, and even gender roles. Imagine a desert village where salt slabs are more than economic goods. They're symbols of status and power. Those who controlled salt sources or caravan routes held significant influence, often forming elite classes or merchant guilds. Salt was a kind of social currency, a tangible sign of wealth and prestige. In many trading communities, salt's distribution affected social hierarchies. Traders who could afford large quantities of salt gained respect and authority, while those who worked in salt mining or caravan handling often occupied lower social ranks. This stratification influenced marriage alliances, political power, and community leadership. The salt trade was a backbone of social order as much as it was of the economy. Historians still argue about the extent to which women participated directly in the salt trade. While some evidence suggests that women were primarily involved in local salt processing and market sales, other accounts indicate that women occasionally joined caravans or managed trade negotiations. In certain societies, women's roles in salt production and trade were crucial, challenging assumptions about gender divisions in ancient African commerce. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some salt traders believed that women who carried salt pouches were protected from evil spirits during their travels, a blend of superstition and social practice that highlights salt's multifaceted role. Also, in some cultures, salt was exchanged as part of dowries, linking it intimately to family and social bonds. So, as you imagine the bustling marketplaces and caravan camps, think about the invisible threads of social power and gender roles that salt helped weave. The salt roads weren't just about moving goods, they were about shaping the very structure of societies, influencing who held power, who traded, and who thrived in the desert's challenging world. You're now veering off the well-trodden paths of the Sahara to explore the lesser-known salt roads beyond the desert's vast expanse in East and Central Africa, where salt trade carved its own unique roots and stories. Imagine yourself standing on the shores of Lake Tanganyika or wandering the highlands of the Rift Valley, where salt was harvested from natural springs, salt pans, and mineral-rich soils. These regions had their own salt economies, distinct from the Sahara but equally vital to local communities. In East Africa, salt was often extracted from saline lakes like Lake Natron and Lake Magadi, where evaporation left behind thick crusts of salt. Traders transported this salt to inland markets, exchanging it for food, pottery, and iron tools. The trade routes here were shaped by geography, rivers, mountains, and forests, suffering different challenges compared to the Sahara's endless sands. Historians still argue about the extent to which these salt routes connected with the trans-Saharan networks or operated independently, but evidence suggests some degree of interaction, especially through coastal trade hubs like Kilwa and Mombasa. These ports linked inland salt producers with Indian Ocean trade, bringing African salt into a global exchange that included spices, textiles, and precious metals. A quirky fact: in some Central African communities, salt was so precious that it was used as a form of currency, but also as a sacred offering to ancestors and spirits. Salt blocks were sometimes placed in shrines or buried with the dead, symbolizing purity and preservation in both life and afterlife. As you imagine the diverse landscapes from dusty salt flats to lush river valleys, you realize that Africa's salt roads were not confined to one desert, but spanned a continent, adapting to local environments and cultures. The salt you think of as a simple mineral was, in these regions, a bridge between worlds, a connector of peoples, and a vital element in the story of African trade and survival. You're now stepping into the mysterious world of ancient salt mines, where the extraction of this precious mineral was both an art and a puzzle for archaeologists today. Picture yourself descending into the cool, shadowy depths of a mine like Tagaza or Bilma, where workers chipped away at massive salt deposits embedded in the earth, their tools simple but effective. These mines were often located in the most inhospitable parts of the desert, making the labor grueling and dangerous. The mining techniques were surprisingly sophisticated. Miners used wooden picks and stone hammers to break off large slabs of rock salt, which were then transported by camel caravans across the desert. Some mines had intricate systems of tunnels and ventilation shafts to improve airflow and safety. The salt was sometimes cut into standardized blocks, making it easier to count and trade. Historians still argue about the exact origins and development of these mining operations, whether they began as small-scale local endeavors or were organized by powerful states to control salt production and trade. Archaeological evidence shows that some mines have been in use for over 1,000 years, indicating a long tradition of salt extraction that shaped regional economies. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some mines, miners left behind mysterious symbols or carvings on the walls, perhaps prayers for safety or marks to claim territory. These enigmatic signs add a layer of human mystery to the harsh, mineral-rich environment. As you imagine the dimly lit tunnels and the rhythmic sounds of pick against salt, you realize that these mines were more than just sources of salt. They were centers of human ingenuity and endurance. The salt you sprinkle on your food tonight might have traveled from these ancient, shadowy places, carrying with it stories of labor, survival, and the enduring quest for this life-sustaining mineral. You continue your journey, now tracing the powerful currents where salt and political power intertwine, shaping empires and sparking conflicts. Imagine the grand courts of the Ghana, Mali, and Songhai empires, where control over salt mines and trade routes was a key source of wealth and influence. Salt wasn't just a commodity, it was a strategic asset, a resource that could make or break rulers. In these empires, kings and sultans taxed salt caravans passing through their territories, filling their treasuries and funding armies, architecture, and scholarship. The famous city of Timbuktu, for example, flourished under Mali's Mansa Musa, whose control of gold and salt trade routes made him legendary for his immense wealth. Salt's importance, extended beyond economics, it was a symbol of sovereignty and control over the lifeblood of the region. Historians still argue about how centralized or fragmented the control of salt trade was, whether empires directly managed mines and caravans, or if local leaders and merchant guilds held significant autonomy. This debate reflects the complexity of African political structures and trade networks, which often blended centralized authority with local customs. A quirky tidbit. Some rulers reportedly used salt as a form of diplomatic gift or tribute, sending carefully packaged salt blocks to allies or rivals as a sign of goodwill or subtle power. Salt was diplomacy in crystalline form, a tangible expression of relationships and influence. As you imagine the bustling courts and caravan routes, the clinking of salt blocks echoing in royal treasuries, you realize that salt was more than a mineral, it was a cornerstone of political power, a silent force shaping the rise and fall of empires across the African continent. The salt roads weren't just pathways through the desert, they were highways of power, wealth, and ambition. You're now stepping into the ongoing scholarly debates that swirl around the organization and extent of the ancient salt trade networks. Picture dusty manuscripts and heated discussions among historians, archaeologists, and anthropologists who piece together fragments of evidence to reconstruct these vast, complex routes. The salt roads weren't a single, neatly mapped highway, but a sprawling web of paths shifting with seasons, politics, and the ever-changing desert landscape. One major debate centers on how centralized the trade was. Some scholars argue that powerful empires like Mali and Songhai tightly controlled the salt trade, regulating production, prices, and routes to maximize their wealth and influence. Others suggest a more decentralized system, where local leaders, merchant guilds, and nomadic groups operated semi-independently, adapting to local conditions and alliances. This debate highlights the dynamic nature of African trade systems, which often blended formal authority with flexible, community-based arrangements. Historians also discuss the extent of interaction between trans-Saharan routes and other African trade networks, such as those in East and Central Africa. Was there a continental salt trade system, or were these regional economies largely separate? Archaeological finds and oral histories provide tantalizing clues, but no definitive answers, keeping the mystery alive. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some researchers propose that certain salt trade rituals and songs encoded secret information about routes and alliances, acting as a kind of encrypted communication among traders. If true, this would add a fascinating layer of complexity to the already rich cultural tapestry of the salt roads. As you imagine scholars debating over maps and manuscripts, you realize that the story of Africa's salt roads is still unfolding. The salt you know today carries echoes of these ancient mysteries, inviting you to ponder the vast networks of human ingenuity, adaptation, and connection that shaped a continent. You drift now into the realm of African mythology, where salt takes on a life beyond the physical sacred substance woven into legends and spiritual beliefs. Imagine sitting around a fire as an elder recounts tales of salt's origins, stories where salt is a gift from the gods or a symbol of life's delicate balance. In many African cultures, salt is more than a mineral. It's a bridge between the earthly and the divine, a substance that preserves not just food, but also memory and spirit. One popular myth tells of a great flood where salt was scattered across the earth to purify and renew the land, cleansing it of evil and preparing it for new life. In other tales, salt is seen as the tears of ancestors, a tangible connection between the living and those who came before. These stories imbue salt with a sacredness that transcends its economic value, making it a key element in rituals, ceremonies, and daily life. Historians still argue how widespread these salt myths were and how they influenced trade practices, but it's clear that salt's symbolic power enriched the cultural landscape of the regions it touched. The mineral's preservative qualities made it a natural metaphor for endurance and protection, themes deeply embedded in African storytelling. A quirky tidbit: some communities believed that carrying a small piece of salt could ward off nightmares or bring good luck, a charming superstition that speaks to salt's intimate role in personal and spiritual life. Salt was, in many ways, a talisman against the uncertainties of life in harsh environments. As you imagine these myths unfolding under starry skies, You feel the weight of salt, not just in your hand, but in the collective imagination of countless generations. The salt roads carried more than goods, they carried stories, beliefs, and the enduring human quest to find meaning in the natural world. You now witness the slow decline of the traditional salt roads, a fading echo of a once vibrant trade network. Imagine the caravan trails growing quieter, the bustling markets less crowded, as new technologies and political changes reshape the landscape. Several factors contributed to this decline: the rise of maritime trade routes, colonial interventions, and the advent of modern transportation that bypassed the arduous desert crossings. The introduction of European ships along Africa's coasts opened new avenues for trade, making salt and other goods more accessible through ports rather than long overland journeys. Colonial powers often disrupted existing trade networks, imposing new borders and economic systems that marginalized traditional caravan routes. The harsh desert, once a highway of commerce, became a barrier to modern economic integration. Historians still argue about the precise timeline and causes of the decline, with some emphasizing environmental changes like desertification, while others focus on political and economic shifts. What remains clear is that the salt road's heyday gradually gave way to new modes of trade and communication. You might find it ironic that while salt was once a precious commodity worth risking life and limb to transport, modern salt is often mass-produced and cheap, a staple found in every kitchen worldwide. The ancient salt traders would probably raise an eyebrow at how their precious cargo is now so commonplace. As you imagine the quieting of caravan bells and the fading footprints in the sand, you sense the end of an era transition from ancient resilience to modern convenience. The salt roads may have declined, but their legacy continues to ripple through African history and culture. You step into a world transformed by the arrival of Europeans, where the ancient salt trade encounters new players and new challenges. Imagine coastal ports, bustling with foreign ships, their sails billowing against the horizon, bringing goods and ideas that would reshape African economies and societies. European contact altered the salt trade in profound ways, introducing new trade goods, currencies, and political dynamics. Salt, once transported primarily by camel caravans across vast deserts, now found new routes via sea and rail. European powers established trading posts along the West African coast, linking local salt producers to global markets. This shift sometimes marginalized traditional caravan traders, disrupting long-established networks and social structures. The competition between old and new trade systems created tensions and opportunities alike. Historians still argue about the extent to which European involvement benefited or harmed African salt economies. Some suggest that new technologies and markets expanded opportunities, while others emphasize the exploitative nature of colonial trade policies that prioritized European interests. The salt trade became entangled with broader patterns of colonial control and resistance. A quirky fact: some European traders were baffled by the importance of salt in African societies, initially dismissing it as a mundane commodity, only to discover its deep cultural and economic significance. This misunderstanding sometimes led to miscalculations in trade negotiations and alliances. As you imagine the clatter of goods being loaded onto ships, the mingling of languages and cultures at coastal ports, and the slow decline of camel caravans, you see how the salt trade adapted and transformed in the face of global change. Salt remained a vital resource, but the roads it travelled and the people who controlled them were shifting beneath the weight of history. You now find yourself contrasting the ancient methods of salt production with the modern techniques that have transformed the industry across Africa. Imagine vast salt pans shimmering under the sun, where workers harvest salt crystals by hand, their movements rhythmic and practiced, echoing traditions passed down through generations. At the same time, mechanized salt factories hum with machinery, producing salt on an industrial scale for local consumption and export. Traditional salt harvesting often involves evaporating saline water in shallow ponds, a method that relies on the sun and wind natural forces that have powered salt production for millennia. In places like Lake Retba in Senegal, or the salt flats of the Danakil Depression in Ethiopia, workers scrape salt crystals from the surface, their skin glistening with sweat and salt. This labour-intensive process connects modern workers with their ancestors, maintaining a tangible link to the past. Historians and anthropologists still debate how much modern salt production has disrupted local economies and environments. While industrialization has increased output and lowered costs, it sometimes threatens traditional livelihoods and fragile ecosystems. Balancing progress with preservation remains a challenge. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some salt-producing communities, workers sing as they harvest salt, a tradition believed to improve morale and even influence the quality of the salt. It's as if the ancient songs of the salt roads still echo in the modern world, blending work and culture. As you imagine the sparkling salt pans and the steady rhythm of harvesting, you realize that salt production in Africa is a living tradition, evolving yet rooted in history. The salt you sprinkle on your food today carries the legacy of countless hands, sun-soaked days, and the enduring human connection to this essential mineral. You're now immersed in the vibrant cultural legacy of salt, where traditions born from ancient trade continue to color music, dance, and cuisine across Africa. Imagine a lively festival in a desert town where drums beat in sync with dancers' feet, and the air is rich with the aroma of salted meats and spiced stews. Salt isn't just an ingredient here, it's a symbol of heritage, community, and survival. In many African cultures, salt is celebrated in songs and dances that honor the endurance of traders and the life-giving power of this mineral. The Tuareg, for example, have musical traditions that echo the rhythms of the caravan, their melodies telling stories of journeys, hardships, and triumphs. Festivals often include rituals where salt is sprinkled to bless the gathering, linking the present to centuries of history. Historians still argue how much these cultural expressions directly stem from the salt trade versus other local influences, but the connection is undeniable. Salt's role in food preservation also shaped culinary traditions, allowing communities to develop unique flavors and dishes that rely on salted ingredients. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some African dances mimic the movements of camels or the loading and unloading of salt slabs, turning everyday labor into artful storytelling. It's a playful reminder that work and culture are often intertwined. As you imagine the vibrant colors, sounds, and tastes of these celebrations, you feel the pulse of salt's enduring presence in African life. The salt roads may have faded, but their spirit lives on in the music, dance, and flavors that continue to nourish body and soul. You now pause to reflect on the environmental impact of the salt trade, a quieter but no less significant story etched into the landscapes shaped by centuries of extraction and transport. Imagine vast salt flats, their white crusts gleaming under the sun, but also the fragile ecosystems that surround theme oases, wetlands, and desert margins that have been altered by human activity. The salt trade left its mark not only on cultures, but on the very earth itself. Salt mining and harvesting, especially in places like the Tagaza mines or the Danakil Depression, required significant labor and altered local environments. Over time, repeated extraction could change soil composition, affect water sources, and disrupt native flora and fauna. Caravan routes also influenced the desert ecology, as water points became hubs of human and animal activity, sometimes leading to overuse or conflict over resources. Historians and environmental scientists still debate the extent of these impacts, balancing the benefits of trade and cultural exchange against environmental costs. Some argue that ancient traders practiced sustainable methods adapted to the desert's limits, while others point to signs of environmental stress linked to intensive salt extraction. A quirky fact: in some regions, salt deposits formed natural white deserts that became unique habitats for specialized plants and animals, creating pockets of biodiversity amid the harsh landscape. These salt-influenced ecosystems are as fascinating as the trade routes themselves. As you imagine the shimmering salt flats and the delicate balance of life around them, you sense the intertwined story of human ambition and nature's resilience. The salt roads were not just pathways of commerce, they were landscapes shaped by centuries of human endeavor and environmental change, a reminder that every journey leaves a trace. You arrive now at the gentle closing of this long journey, feeling the weight of history settle softly like desert dusk. The salt roads, those ancient arteries of trade, culture, and connection, have left an enduring imprint on Africa's landscape and spirit. Imagine the sun setting over endless dunes, the last glimmers of light fading as night wraps the desert in a cool embrace. The stories you've travelled through the traders' songs, the rituals, the bustling markets, the rise and fall of empire snow drift quietly into the vast silence. Salt was never just a mineral, it was life, wealth, faith, and community. It shaped the rhythms of daily existence and the grand sweep of history. The salt roads remind you that even in the harshest environments, human ingenuity and resilience can carve paths of connection and meaning. As you rest here, you carry with you the echoes of camels' footsteps, the crackling of campfires, and the whispered prayers of traders who crossed these sands long ago. Historians still debate many details, and mysteries remain, but the essence is clear. Salt was a thread weaving together diverse peoples and places, a silent witness to centuries of endurance and exchange. Your journey tonight has traced that thread, bringing you closer to a world both distant and deeply human. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath slows, let the desert's quiet vastness soothe you. The salt roads fade into the night, but their legacy lingers, a soft, enduring pulse beneath the stars.